Good afternoon, everyone. Thumbs up if you can hear me to panelists. Good, great. Thank you so much for making the time to be here. Today we are going to take some time to host this forum on food literacy. My name is Christine Mungai. I am a writer and journalist. And I'm also the curator of Baraza Media Lab in Nairobi. We are a co-creation space that supports the Kenyan media ecosystem, and especially in public interest storytelling. And I don't think there's anything more in the public interest than food. This is something that we think about every day, we prepare in our homes every day, that affects our lives, our health, our
I think we lost Christine.
I'm a freeze kidogo.
So, you can just carry on, yeah, as we wait for her to get back.
Sure.
Yeah. My name is Emmanuel Atamba from the Root to Food Initiative, and yes, we are convening this discussion. Thank you for all those who have joined. We continue with it as normal. And I think from where Christine left is that the purpose of this discussion is just to talk about food and how important it is to all of us, things that affect the food that we eat, how it is grown, how we access it. So this is part of a series of forums that will continue. I think I'll hand over back to Christine. I haven't said anything, Christine, you can just pick up from there.
No problem, I am back. These things happen. It's like technology knows when you're about to do something important. When I was on Twitter the whole morning, everything was fine. But now the Wi-Fi suddenly decides to misbehave. All right, as I was saying before tech cut me off, I'm really excited to be moderating this panel because I've worked with Root to Food in different capacities in the past as a journalist and writer. And I've really come to appreciate the kind of scope of work that they do, and also how much we need to be involved and informed as consumers, right? We have a part to play in this. So today is the first of a series of 3 public forums on food literacy. And today I'm really, really pleased to be joined by my esteemed panel. On the panel, I have Emmanuel Atamba. Emmanuel is a food and farming systems expert, as well as a farmer. He's involved in research, development, and execution of agri-food projects. Welcome, Emmanuel. You don't have to say good evening, viewers, but we are here. On the panel, I also have Wanja Muguongo. She is a feminist for whom the earth and soil are life and healing. I really love that bio. So Wanja is an organic farmer, and her politics is based on the belief that food is political and the battle must be fought and won.
Yeah, I think we have lost Christine again. So maybe Wanja, you can introduce yourself. Now you have to speak for yourself. Thank you.
I can introduce myself, bios are nice, crisp things. And unless I was reading it, I wouldn't remember what I had written. But yes, I am an organic farmer. my work, my life is recognizing that food is political. I studied political science, and politics is the study of the distribution of power and resources, and there is no greater place in which that is exercised than food. So I come from a place of interrogating what we eat, why we eat it, how it's distributed, who has food on the table and who doesn't, and that's what I bring to this conversation.
I'm so glad. I'm going to just start us off on the questions, and I want to begin with Emmanuel. Emmanuel, what is food literacy, and why is it important for us to understand what that term means?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I think we have not introduced Chef Kabui, so maybe Christine, I think Wanja only introduced herself. And then
Okay.
I can go for the question. Thanks.
Thank you. I think I was cut off when I was introducing Chef. Chef Kabui is passionate about food justice. He is a chef, an expert on food literacy, a medical anthropologist, and an organic farmer. And Chef has been actively involved in promoting food literacy, both as a speaker and writer, an expert commentator as well. So welcome, Chef. Before, I had just jumped the gun and had started asking questions, but I just want to let our audience know that we have a poll that is live on this Zoom webinar. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a poll that has just gone live, which is basically just asking 2 questions. And at any time as you're listening to this to this webinar, you can begin to answer those questions. And we will have 2 polls. This is the first one that we have at the beginning of the webinar, and there'll be a second one at the end of the webinar. So you can, as you listen, you can just go ahead and start answering, putting in your comments, your answer on the poll. So I had begun by asking Emmanuel, what is food literacy and why is it important for us as ordinary consumers to understand what that term means?
Yeah, thank you, Christine, and I'm glad to be here and to participate in this discussion. I think with very great people also, it's nice to speak, and I want to appreciate the people who have joined. It will be an interesting conversation. Now, food literacy for me, in my plain language, is basically just understanding about your food and everything about your food, from how it's grown, how it's processed, how it gets to you, how you buy it, how the pricing mechanism is done, everything about food. I think it's very important. And why that is necessary for me, I think, is because it helps you to know where you are as a player in this system, because we are all players by virtue of being consumers. It helps you to know where you are and how your habits, how your consumption, or how your activities around food, whether it's production or consumption, or just consumption, affect the entire spectrum and affect the entire ecosystem around food. So it's very important so that we don't just exist and eat and consume things. I think for me, it's very important that we really put in thought in what we eat and really put in a lot of consideration in how that comes to happen, especially looking at how it affects others and how it affects the environment and how it affects the future as well.
I'd like to throw that question to Chef. What does food literacy mean to you as someone who has actively been involved in that space? And why is it important for us as consumers to understand and to appreciate what food literacy is all about?
Yeah, thank you so very much. I also want to give a word of thanks for those who organized this panel and for the most capable panelists that we have. I'm honored to be in their presence. So food literacy is something that I've been working on for the last maybe 9 years or so. I taught a class at a farmer's market in Charlotte, and for 16 weeks every summer, which is the most productive growing season, we'll talk about that topic. So it's something that's very close to my heart. Food literacy, essentially, in very, very brief terms, means the basic understanding and contextualization of our habits as consumers as participants in the power brokerage game, that we recognize that every action we take in terms of consuming food does empower someone. It can be the, so that's all, man. Somebody is gaining and somebody can potentially lose. Somebody is being empowered and somebody can potentially be disempowered by the simple process of selecting the food that I process with my 32 teeth, if I have dentures, whatever it is that you have, but is the most fertile ground for shifting power or absorbing power from one side to the other. So we are consumers. The type of food we consume can be grown organically, it can have chemicals, it can be grown using child labor, it can be used slave labor, all those kind of things. That means essentially that I cannot consume food without realizing the context in which I'm consuming food. Food is not just chewing and providing myself the calories. There's all these background things that are going on in the back, and there's all these things that will be affected in the future simply by the choice of food I choose to consume. I simply finish by saying this. In my work, the one idea, if I can freeze and not have anything else to say, technology, as you said, is technology. It is what it is. I've come to recognize how erroneous it is for a world to live and go about their own business without recognizing that the process of feeding people bad food is a worse crime against humanity. And we seem to be oblivious. People say, oh, I want to have access to food, which is fine. But can we recognize that feeding people bad food should be recognized as the #1 crime against humanity? Why? Because it happens below the radar, that you can poison people and they complain about all things. They complain about getting access to healthcare, getting access to better testing, getting access to medication, having a better government intervention, all that stuff, without recognizing that the very root of the problem starts with food. And you cannot have any good healthcare, the best healthcare in the world, if the foundation of it is not food. That's food literacy for me.
Shaf, thank you so much for bringing in the issue of food and putting it in the context of power. I really love what you've said, that food is power and our food choices empower or disempower different constituencies depending on how that power dynamic plays out. And you've also talked about food being an integral part of well-being, right? That if you're feeding folks food that is not good for them, then you're directly impacting not just their eating, right?
We just lost Christine.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Chef, for the insights. I think now we can move to Wanja, and Wanja, you can share with us what food literacy means to you.
I grew up in.
Sorry.
She's back. Okay.
Whoa. Can
ahead,
everyone hear me okay?
Yeah,
Good.
Christine,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Good. I was just going to bring Wanja in, and I was saying that I don't know if Wanja, you grew up in the Nairobi that I grew up in, or in an urban setting somewhere in Kenya. But when I grew up, the kind of green vegetables, let's use green vegetables as an example, that I would see around was sukuma wiki, #1. That was #1. #2 was cabbage, and then #3 was spinach. And it's only in the past decade or so, or maybe 15 years or so, that this, what we were calling traditional vegetables, started making it into the urban markets, that I would accompany my mom to the market. And now we would start eating managu and kunde and osuga and all these other things. And when I really thought about it, just using my family as an example, I remember that was coming from like an increased health consciousness. My mom was becoming more conscious about like health outcomes, eating healthy livings, and that's how these things came. But I saw a parallel with a lot of other families that I knew. There was a lot.
I think I'll just have to take over as we wait for Christine to join us. But I know she was about to have you, Wanja, to talk more about what food literacy really means to you. So
Foods become available and present in our markets. How do certain foods become available and present in our markets? And how can consumers influence that?
Great. No, Christine, I actually didn't grow up in an urban area. I was born in Nairobi. I was actually born in Pumwani Hospital, but my parents then, many things. I was sent to live with my grandmother. I grew up in Teto with my grandmother until I was about 6, and then I was raised by my mother in Nyeri. And the thing is, because we lived far from a town. I grew up in a forest. I grew up in the Aberdare forest. We lived far from town, so actually conventional veggies were not that available. There was a bit of spinach, some skuma, but I grew up on mohikanaihu and mafake and when I was now grown up and post college and in Nairobi, the food choices became much fewer because there isn't much food available in urban areas, actually. And that's a lot of reasons. And they have to be reasons to do with time and effort, but mostly to do with the effect of colonialism on our traditional foodways. When I think about what you're saying about the renaissance of people going back to traditional vegetables, it has happened to some families, but not to most when I see, especially in central Kenya. There are very many places where people are getting more aware of eating traditional food, but we still are stuck in very few food choices. The starch options are still really for wheat, maize, rice, and I forget the fourth. And the vegetables are also very few. And I think that I do hope the renaissance would grow, but also that even when we're going to traditional food, vegetables, we would go past the 5, which is managu, terere, kunde, mto, mrenda, and embrace even more. I think the one thing that I am grateful for being born African is just how much food is available in our environments, and especially even being born East African. The amount of food that we can eat is so vast, and food literacy for me is actually helping people interrogate what food means for them and why that is food. Why is ugali or rice more food than cassava and yams and arrowroot and ngwashe? Why is bread more a breakfast than matoke? And a lot of this has to do with how the colonial project robbed us of the pride that we should have in African food, and the way to defeat Africans in the colonial project was actually the one that was the most useful, the one that was the most effective, was the lie that what is African is inferior. And I think that for me, food literacy is actually a conversation about thinking about what is food and why is that food, and why is another thing not respected as food. And when we trace it back to the internalized racism and the hatred that we have been taught to have on African things, it might help us interrogate better what food is, and it would help us interrogate better why that food is not available for everybody.
Wanja, thank you so much for that. That you've even expanded our idea of even what traditional vegetables is all about. In some ways, we still have a very limited imagination, right? Chef, if you can hear me, wave. Good. I just want to hear your response to what Wanja has just shared. about how consumers can influence what's actually available, and the kind of journeys that you've seen people in your spaces or in your communities take with a greater understanding of why food literacy is so important, and also understanding how power plays into these dynamics. Chef, you'll unmute so that we can hear you.
All right, good day, good day, good day. Yes, yeah. Thank you very much, Wanja, for those solid points. One thing I would probably add or maybe adjust a little bit is the fact that, and this is just a debate, it doesn't mean it's nothing scientific about it, but what I want to start with myths. Myths here of late have become very, very interesting to me because, and by myth, I mean something that people just generally accept to be true, whether it has any historical fact or scientific fact, right? So let's talk about where Wanja kind of left off, or at least touched on, that the colonialists came and they taught us to hate our food, which is very, very strategic way. But if we take a step back, think about how much power somebody would have to convince you that something that we believe, we've never seen it, and that we should abandon something we believe. We just believe it. I mean, it's just our myth. That's what I mean by myth. It's just something we believe. And to take on something that they believe. We don't see it. They don't see ours. We don't see theirs. But they convince us that what they believe, their own belief of a myth they have, is more powerful than ours. To me, that's where we should start if we really want to understand food, in my view. So the colonialists come and they say, you know what? Even your own beliefs are inferior. Okay, food is something, you see, food we can taste. We can say, oh, I taste sugar. It tastes good. People who taste porridge without sugar, they taste porridge with sugar. Yeah, for sure. That's something, at least at a very minimum, whether it's healthy or not, that's besides the point. But it's something tangible we can argue about. But these people are coming to tell us that we should abandon our myths that we can see. And they haven't, how do they see our myths are better than theirs? Okay, I haven't seen your mother. I haven't seen your father. How can I tell you your father is taller than my father? You haven't seen my father, but you've seen your father. But you believe that my father is taller than your father. And it's just a belief. You yourself haven't seen your father. You're just told, oh, you're born, your father passed away when you're born. You've never seen your father. But you believe that my father, whom I haven't seen, you haven't seen, is taller than my father. Think about the inherent power. I know it's very vague, but think about for a minute that these people have the power to tell us we can believe in ourselves, we can believe in our gods. If they can, my goodness, if I can convince you to believe in something you've never seen, think about how much power then I have to convince you about things you can't see, and I can really manipulate you. So that's where I start with power. So food literacy, in my context, is what? There to only one point probably I want to add that's very relevant to this discussion to kind of dovetail on what Wanja said. It's really fascinating to me when I come. I've been living in the US for 32 years. I moved here when I was 20 years. And so I've been living in the US longer than I've been living in Kenya. So when I come back to Kenya, and I do most of my work here, I only come to Kenya whenever I have time or just for a short time of the year. But I noticed an interesting fact when I visited Kenya the last time I was there, that wealthy people in Kenya are the ones who are consuming junk food. So KFC comes and people without money can't afford to go to KFC. Now, wealthy people are going to KFC to eat junk food. So think about that. In the US, people who don't have money are the ones who eat a KFC and junk food. Those are low-level eateries. Okay, so I can give you a good example for the context of our listeners. I'll be going to California next month, and one of the places I'll be visiting is a place that has a restaurant called the French Laundry. If anybody want to look it up, it's called the French Laundry. If me and Wanja visited here and I was taking Wanja to eat there, she should at least budget for the two of us 250,000 Kenya shillings for a meal. We are not sleeping there, by the way, just to go and eat. So here you have wealthy people eating really expensive food. Then on the other hand, you have Africans who have been duped to hate everything about themselves, and they are paying high dollars for food that's damaging the economy, that we can be audacious enough to complain that we want jobs, to agree to borrow money from the West, and then to give them that money, the same money we borrowed. We use that money to buy food that will build jobs in their own country. Some of these fast food restaurants are bringing food, everything they bring here. So we are promoting chicken farmers. If you're going to KFC, you're promoting chicken farmers in the US. And you're not only promoting chicken farmers in the US, you're dispossessing your own Kenyan farmer from the market of selling their own chicken. So you're promoting stock market, the stocks and investors or people who have invested in shares here in the US to buy KFC shares. You see what I'm saying? So that's where I'm looking at. That we have to understand that the choices we make about food are very, very much tied to the myths that we have come to believe. So we have to first decolonize the myths that we have. We understand that this is not just about what it tastes. It's not just how it looks for me when I take my kids. And then we socialize our own kids to go and dispossess their own country, to impoverish their own country, right? Because of the myths that we've come to believe. So myths to me are where we need to start. You know, if I had a choice, I say, let's start with the myths. That we've come to believe all these stupid lies, that we should act in ways that disempower ourselves. Okay, the colonialists came, the enslavers came, they captured Africans and they brought us in chains. Now we are running and paying for our chains to enchain our country. That's why I want to start.
Oh, that's so powerful, Chef. My goodness. We are going to talk more about what you have said and build from that. But I want to bring Emmanuel in now. Emmanuel, I want to ask you, going by what Wanja has said and what Chef has said, how do you think the ordinary consumers can get involved in decisions that are made about the food that reaches them? When you go to the market and you find onions or potatoes, if that's your local market that you buy things from, you're not really involved in the process of the kind of potato that reached you, or you know, even knowing how you can be empowered in that sense, especially when it comes to those of us who don't grow their own food, right? If you have a small plot of land and you're growing manago or sukuma wiki or tomatoes, then you have more power to decide or to make decisions around it. But for those of us who, both in the urban and the rural setting, who depend on what's available in the market, and rural consumers increasingly do buy food more than they grow it, how can consumers be involved in those decisions, especially when you think about the cost of production and the issues of land access, that even if you might have wanted to actively grow your own food or something like that, there's so many things that you need to think about to make this possible.
Yeah, thanks, Christine, and thanks, I think, to the wise words that have been said already. I think, and today the work that I'm doing is exactly on that. How can consumers actually come together and really, you know, have a better voice in shaping how our food system works? So first of all, as a consumer, anywhere you are, of course, you have a choice. You can decide to say, I'm going to buy this food and I'm not going to buy this food. That purchasing is actually a transaction that is almost similar to voting, because you are definitely deciding one option from another option. And what factors should inform that? It's not just about price. It should also have all the other factors, I think, that have already been captured. The issues of producers, what system is that food coming from? Okay, so if someone is buying bananas from or avocados from, for example, from PC, where I know they buy even one bag at 200 shillings, and you're going to buy from this broker very expensively, then you are supporting them to impoverish that farmer on the ground there. So there are a lot of other factors that consumers need to understand, but I think the most important thing, I think I'll just say two things: how consumers can be empowered to really, make an impact on how their food is produced and how it gets to them and how they access it. is that one, consumers need to have knowledge. You need to know how food is produced, just basic knowledge, just have that. And I think most of Kenyans have that by virtue of a lot of us, even in Nairobi here, have grown up in rural areas, but we tend to look at that as not knowledge. We think that, okay, so because I now have my degree in journalism, I have my degree in law, whatever knowledge I had about how bananas are produced and how potatoes are harvested and how potatoes are stored and how cassava is prepared, for example, now you're having people dying of cyanide poisoning because they forgot how to prepare cassava and they were taught that by their grandparents. So when we forget that, that is where the problem comes in, because you can't engage in something you don't know about. You cannot engage about issues of food safety if you don't even know how food is produced and who is producing the food. So we need to have knowledge. And then the other thing I think is consumers need to really build around strong movements that can really champion and advocate for better and safer food systems. So safe food is a right for everyone. Adequate food is a right for everyone. You need to have choice. Choice is very important. I really agree with Chef Kabui also, because I follow a vegan diet. There's really very little vegan options in Nairobi, for example. If you go to CBD now and just try to get beans and chapati or beans and rice, you will not find it. Everyone is selling beef or chicken or fish. And where is the question of option coming from? And you ask and people are like, okay, we don't have that. So you find somewhere else to eat. But if consumers start demanding that, we need to have these options. The reason why a lot of people are eating chips and chicken in the city, in the CBD, is because sometimes they don't have those options. Yeah, where are you getting green grams in CBD? How many hotels preparing green grams? People will be interested to eat green grams and brown chapatis, which are healthier, but those options are not there. But consumers really need to have the knowledge and then come together and work together to advocate for better food systems. I think that those are the two things I can suggest.
Emmanuel, thank you so much for bringing in the aspect of your purchasing price. I mean, your purchasing choice is actually an exercise of power and influence. I remember when I was working in the CBD some years ago, the early years when I was in town a little bit more, there were really absolutely no options, very few options for eating even that chapati that you're talking about. Even ugali in the CBD was, it was not something that you could just like walk down the street and find a place. However, things have changed, like you're saying, and even if the change may not be so much in the direction that, there's still so many gaps, but there is like movement is possible. I think that's the point that I want to make at this point. Movement is possible. And that's why forums like this are so important. Before I ask my next question, I just want to let our attendees know that we can continue putting our comments in the chat. If you have a question, the best place to put it is in the Q&A chat, is in the Q&A window. And as the session is going on, I'm going to be just picking from what I'm seeing in the chat, directing it to our panelists and speaking more to it. On that note, I just want to ask a question that has come in our Q&A chat, and I think I'll direct this to Emmanuel. In Kenya, we have the kadogo economy, of small things being sold for low prices, mostly found in informal settlements and in low-income areas. Why is food in these areas cheaper than the food that maybe you would find at a neighborhood supermarket in Langata, for example?
Yeah. One is really the intention for that kind of service that is being offered. I think the people who are making chapatis, in our mtas, most of these guys are doing that knowing exactly the situation that their neighbors are in. So, they will not price their chapatis at 100 shillings because they know my neighbor will not afford this. Even if I'm the only seller on the street, I think I know my people, they can't afford this. I know, if I'm making coffee for guys who are working in Juakali sector to distribute in the evening, I have to put a price that I know they can afford because I know these people, they are my people. On the flip side, on the other side, we have all these, big chains and of restaurants and supermarkets that price food the way they want because they don't know exactly the context. You put a restaurant in town, you just put a price and say whoever can afford comes in, and that person who comes in pays for like 5 people would have eaten there or something like that. And I think that is also what Chef Kabui was talking about. See, the question is, what systems work for us. Those chapatis and madondos, and in fact, some of those small kiosks are very safe. They have very nice, hygiene measures in place. They produce food nicely there. They serve the food there, almost zero wastage. Some of these restaurants that we find are big restaurants, most developed and all this, they throw away a lot of food. These people don't throw food. Yeah, they prepare food knowing exactly, they know exactly this person from this house will come for the chapatis and this person from this house will come for the, so I'm making 50 chapatis. I'm not making 200 chapatis and then trying to recover the loss of the 150 chapatis that I will throw from the 50 chapatis that I will sell. So that system is working, it's efficient. And that is why the traders are happy, they're able to sell, they're always there, they have stock, and the people who buy from them are happy. And Christine, you find we call this, especially the women who make this kind of food, we call them mother. They are, we refer them to them as mother, like, because they feed us, and they are consistent in how they do their food. And the people who have eaten food from those kiosks, they don't eat anywhere else. They say, I'm going for mother. So it's because that system is efficient. It's not because there's anything wrong with it. I don't think it's because the food is not safe. I don't think it's because the food is of low quality. It is because the system is working for the people.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. That's so important to emphasize. That idea that we feel so at home and nourished in that setting that we call these women mother. That's really powerful to think about. I'm going to pick from something I'm seeing in the chat. Nyambura is asking, do we really have the capacity to know where our food comes from? If you visit a market today and you buy ndomas and you're told that they're from Moranga, maybe they were from some swamp somewhere outside of Nairobi. Wanja, I'd like to direct this question to you. If I'm in the market right now and after this webinar, I'm really concerned about where my managu is coming from, and I ask the person who's selling it to me, how trustworthy is that information? What can I do? And what options do I have in that moment?
I completely get that. And one of the reasons why I became a farmer is, one of the many reasons I became a farmer was to know where my food came from, to be able to control what actually I put on my plate, and to have the assurance that it's produced in safe ways. I cannot give a simple question to Nyambura, a simple answer to Nyambura, because that would be trivializing a really big question. I would simply say there more and more farmers now are gaining more and more of even a social media presence. I think for me, the most important thing about knowing where your food comes from is knowing your farmer. And there are ways to actually know a farmer. And this is not a shout out to myself, but I try a lot, even like on my Instagram page, to talk about food literacy, talk about how food is produced, just stories from my shamba. And I know that there are many places that you can be able to get that kind of information. There are networks of farmers. There are organic stores like Sylvia's Basket on Gong Road. There are organic restaurants like Kienyeji's that is just next to Yaya Center. Those are people who source food from farmers. They don't source food from a market. They don't go to Kawangware market and buy managu. They actually have farmers bring that food to them. And I think that one of the things we are learning now, even with the COVID pandemic, with the way we are destroying the environment and the way the world is changing, I think that things are getting smaller. There was a time when, large markets and large supermarkets were where people shopped more and more. People are getting smaller. People are starting to get food from their local farmer, to get food from an urban garden. And I think that is really good, not only for ourselves and for our families, but also for the environment and for the nation when we go small. I know the convenience of going to a market and all the food is laid before you and you can be able to choose, or which apple looks nice and which banana doesn't look like it has bondecard and which pawpaw is looking cute and healthy. But all those things are leading us to eating more and more unsafe food. I think that when you ask why consumers are not driving the market as much as they should, and some of the myths that Chef was talking about, is that good food needs to look beautiful. and I think for me, I struggle as an organic farmer with the conversation of producing sweet looking cute food. But when people go to markets, they can be able to choose which sukuma wiki looks bigger than the other, which spinach looks healthy. And that, when we talk about who it empowers the people who put a lot of nitrogen into their veggies, grow them in sewers so that they look all nice and green. It disempowers the organic farmer who is just struggling to ensure that there are no synthetic inputs coming into your food. So in answer to how do you know where your food comes from, put an effort in knowing your farmer. It's not that difficult. And I don't say that to trivialize the question. I'm just simply saying, if you put the effort, you can get the answer. You can find out where does the food come from for this organic store. Find out who that farmer is and get to know them. Corn, the Kenya Organic Agriculture Network has networks of organic farmers all over the country. And these are farmers who struggle to get market. What consumers can do is actually demand for organic food so that organic farmers can be able to produce more. And I'd be able to give tips. I'd be happy to do that. But I think always looking for convenience so that food is right in front of you is not the best way to go. The best way to go is actually hunt for your farmer the way you hunt for a good employer, the way you hunt for a good bank, the way you hunt for a good teacher for your children, because this is a really important person in your life.
Wanja, that's really powerful. I just want to direct the next question to you, just to pick up from what you've said. You know, if you look at our regulations around packaging information, for example, the nutritional labels, we have regulations around that. In countries like the US, they are even more detailed and stricter, right? In terms of putting in nutritional information, the amount of calories, carbohydrates, nutrients, and all that. If for some of in our minds that is what constitutes crucial or vital information to make decisions around food, how would that apply in our context, right? Whereas you've talked about, and Emmanuel as well, a lot of our food is prepared fresh. We have less packaged options, and packaged options, like you say, empower those who are curating for beauty rather than nutrients, I guess, because someone will pick up something from the shelf immediately, depending on how it looks, and for them to actually read the nutrition label and use that as a decision-making step might not always happen. So this information that makes us confident that our food is good for us, number one. How can we create a system or some kind of options around making that possible if most of our food is prepared fresh? In our house, we cook every day, right? And so the majority of the food that we eat is not passed down, I guess, in that kind of way.
I think the reason why they are in all these nations, there's quite a lot of emphasis on putting the ingredients and what's in it, and how much of it, or how much of this is in this, and how much of that is in that. Is also a lot of that food is processed. So there is I need to show how much MMDA, how much artificial sweetener, how much of this or this preservative is in it, because of also all the studies that have been done about what is harmful and what is not. I would say for processed food, it is extremely important that those labels are there, and that information is there, and that institutions like KEBS, the Bureau of Standards, would do the work to ensure that food is standardized, and that and that when a manufacturer or a food processor says this is what is in the food, that's actually what is in the food. However, I would then say, please stay away from processed food as much as you can, if it is possible. While it is important that if you're going to have whatever, some pizza or whatever it is that you know the calories or whatever. Let's try and make things fresh. Go to restaurants that make food fresh. I'm so glad Emmanuel talked about how food in small settlements and in small places is actually fresher because it moves faster. And then we won't be so worried about how much preservative is in our jam if we actually make the jam ourselves, if we actually educate ourselves about how to do things so that we don't waste food, so that we don't so that we don't need to buy processed food. But I think, to your point, it is important for our countries, African countries, to emphasize that food processors label what they are putting in our food. I think it is also more important for our countries to emphasize, to ensure that they do not allow chemicals that poison us to come into our fertilizers, that come into herbicides that governments promote. It's not so much whether the jam that is in the supermarket has poisonous preservatives. I am more worried that the plums that are in that jam were produced using chemicals that were poisonous and that were allowed into our systems by our governments. I think that for me, food literacy is exactly knowing what you're eating and how it's grown and how it's produced, and pushing our governments to make it completely illegal and completely punishable for food producers to poison us, whether they are food processors or whether they are farmers or whether they are big pharma and agrochemical companies. That's what I am more concerned about.
Chef, how does this resonate with you, as especially drawing on on the context that you are in the US, where packaging and regulations are quite more elaborate? And how would you see that right to know fitting into our real context, like our daily context here in Kenya?
Good. I'm showing this for the sake of Wanja and for sake of elaborating my point. Here is an onion I bought from Whole Foods, and here I don't need to know my farmer. I don't need to necessarily know my farmer. Okay, which is, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's great if we can. But we can push the government, talking about power, if people have the power, and demand and force the government to label food, to pass legislation that actually labels the food, all the food we buy, not only processed food. And I appreciate Wanja's point. Yeah, a processed food is critical because it has so many ingredients, but so is fresh food. If somebody grew fresh managus using bad water, then I don't think that is any less poisonous for us. But anyway, so here is an onion. It has a label on it, and the label, all organic food in the US, for example, have 5 numbers. They start with a 9, and obviously I know you can't see it, but at least even if you can't see it properly, I want to make a demonstration of it. But every food that is not organic has 4 numbers. Organic food have 5 numbers. They start with a 9. The more chemicals you put with them in your, let's say you started growing food organic, but there was a blight, for example, and you decided, hey, look, there are these allowable pesticides or herbicides that I used, and to save my crop, I'm going to spray a little bit of it on it. Well, that is not the same thing as somebody who grew their skumas or managus using pig sludge or put a lot of chemical fertilizers in it, use Roundup and all that. So labeling the food is very critical. And that's one thing I love about being in the US, that at the very least, I know how much poison I'm putting in my food. So if I want to poison myself, that's fine. Or if I can afford and I don't have enough money to buy organic food, I know exactly how much chemicals I'm putting in my food. That's number one. Number two.
Chef, I'm going to interrupt you a bit just to let Emmanuel respond to what you've just said.
Sure.
Emmanuel, could you bring this home for us? We're in a context where people are struggling to make ends meet. sometimes they don't have the brain space to think about this or to worry about this. Let me put it that way. In the chat, I'm seeing comments about, speaking from a consumer point of view, people like convenience and will not go out of their way with their busy schedules to find out where their food comes from. Skuma is skuma. We are going to eat it and we won't sleep hungry. The Lorax says, how does this conversation resonate with a mother living in the slums, for example? How easy is it for her to hunt for a farmer when the survival of her family is on the line almost every day? How do you bring this home in terms of like the context that we are in, of livelihoods being on the line, of people really not having very many options? And maybe I could be wrong. Bring it home for us and help us to understand how this can relate to us.
No, just quickly, and I also wanted Chef Kabui to finish his point. I was just responding to the chat. There's a lot of question of why organic food should be expensive. I don't see why organic food should be twice the price. I don't see any reason for that, and there's no justification for that. I think what we are seeing is that there are a lot of gatekeepers that are coming into this sector. You're talking about organic food, and then in areas where even it's unnecessary to label. If I'm getting bananas from my friend Wanja, assuming she's from Kisii and they have a lot of bananas and she's sending me bananas, and I don't, she doesn't have to label them. If I trust her, if I trust Chef Kabui, he's sending me avocados. It's that simple. There are trust mechanisms that can work very well, especially in the African context. We don't need that. And there are a lot of things that relate with food that we don't need in the African context. In our own context, they're not unnecessary. For example, we're talking about cold chains and all these things. We have a lot of solar here. We can dry our produce and eat them dry. We don't need to freeze dry, for example. Those are technologies that are applied elsewhere. We don't need them here. Just the same way we did need the telephone, we don't need cold chain here in our food system. Because there are things that are unnecessary. And you see, a lot of consumers today are storing food in fridges and they don't need that. If you have a garden here or your farmer is in Kiambu, you don't need to store food in the fridge. You will eat and then tomorrow you'll go back to the farmer and get some other food. That's why you find a lot of people in middle class have fridges in the house that are empty, or they're just keeping soda there because they don't need that. You don't need that in our context. You don't need to put food in the fridge. It's simple. So there are a lot of things that we have been borrowing. So that transition to organic agriculture, I think, organic food, I think should really be guided by our context, that we have our own strong cultural ties and community ties that we can use to verify food, to verify the source of food. We have strong community ties. The people in the urban areas are strongly connected with the people in rural areas. There are trust mechanisms that we can put in place that doesn't necessarily need to make that food expensive. I don't think organic food needs to be expensive. And you find even people go to an extent of labeling, organic coconut, organic avocados. How many people do you see spraying chemicals on avocados? Very rare. So how today now, if I have an avocado and someone labels an avocado from the same tree, they say, oh, this is organic and this is not organic. I know there are people who use chemicals if they have pest infestation and all that. But really, sometimes we make it necessarily expensive for people to access good food. Good food is a right for everyone, and everyone should be able to access that food. I think that is very important. And when we are talking about interventions, those interventions need to carry everyone across the socioeconomic ladder. We don't need to make interventions for middle class, that they can go and get food that is labeled, and then we have people in the same society who cannot access that. I don't think that would be fair. I think we need to address the whole issue. Food that is in Kangemi should equally be safe as food that is gotten, for example, from the organic shops. So we don't need to say because we have organic shops, the guys who are getting food from Kangemi can continue to suffer. I don't think we need, let's try to make sure that all the interventions cover everyone, I think. But I agree with Chef Kabui that there are systems that can be put in place. We don't, there's this thing that we don't have money in this country, and we have, billions to spend on processes that are illegal, in quotes, So there's nothing like we don't have money. We are paying a lot of taxes. Personally, myself, I'm paying a lot of taxes. You guys are paying taxes. Everyone is paying taxes. Nowadays, you buy anything, including water, you pay tax. So there's nothing that we don't have money. I think we just have not risen and up enough to demand that some of these issues be addressed using the taxpayer money that we are contributing to the government.
Emmanuel, thank you so much for that. I really, really love the idea of alternative trust systems or mechanisms of trust verification and relationship building that already exist in our communities. Just going back to us, a little personal anecdote. When we started cooking more managu and traditional vegetables at home, my mom started like being in more deeper relationships with some of her friends who had moved out of the city, maybe had retired, had started focusing more on farming. And I would see her go and do our shopping for the week, like our vegetables, to farms that she knew, right? And it was really a sacrifice when you think about it. The market was not far from our house, but she would go all the way because it mattered to her, right? And I'm not saying that she was someone who had so many options, but she was basing her decision-making on trust and relationships, yeah? Wanja, I want to bring you in again and to ask you, there may be people watching this or who are going to listen to this later, and this conversation is very depressing to them, right? Because it's bringing in many questions that they may be asking themselves. And on one hand, they realize that this is something important that they need to pay attention to. And all of us want the best for our families, of course. And so when this kind of information comes your way, you may be thinking, this is important. But also there's the feeling of like, how will I actually be able to do this, right? When there's a conflict in our minds on something that we think is important, but that we also worry we may not be able to achieve, sometimes there's a feeling of disillusionment that maybe it's better if maybe I didn't even know about all this stuff. I was okay the way I was living before. Come mbaya, I mean, really. But what this is creating in my mind right now is anxiety, right? So I just want you to speak to that feeling of anxiety. And even when it goes to the extreme of like, I really wish I didn't even encounter all this. Why am I here thinking about this if I don't feel confident to actually fulfill what I want to fulfill now that I have this new information? Just speak to us about that feeling of disillusionment and disempowerment, perhaps frustration. How can we overcome those obstacles in our own small way, in our own real lived experiences?
Thanks, Christine. That's a really important question, because sometimes when you're faced with like this huge thing, you know, like whenever you watch some weight loss video of somebody exercising and they lost 100, you just despair because you just don't think that you can achieve that. And that is not the aim of conversations around food literacy or access to food or access to safe food. Let me just quickly respond to the person who was asking about the slum woman and how she cannot access a farmer. And also say that that's part of the myths that we have. And one of the things that I struggle with is the idea that poor people should eat bad food and only the rich should eat good food, because poor people anyway are too busy living and surviving. And that is why they can eat food. It is so wrong for us to assign the people that society has impoverished, for us to assign them bad health and bad food. I met a lovely young man in a conversation that I had the other day with Shamba Jijini, grew up in the slums of Nairobi and started an initiative called City Shamba that teaches people in low-income neighborhoods, informal settlements like the Korogosho where he grew, and Majengo and Kibera, how to have their own urban shamba, and helps them actually create it. Those are networks where that woman you're so concerned about who lives in the slum can be able to be her own farmer and her farmer to her community, or know the farmer. And that is part of what I'm trying to say with hope. There are solutions. I think that it's not all doom and gloom, because we are having this conversation. I'm with Chef Kafoye and Emmanuel and yourself, Christine. That means that the conversation is opening up. I think there is more challenge that is going to even counties. I wish I lived in Kirinyaga County, where the governor actually cares about organic farming and actually promotes organic farming. And I don't live in Muranga, where there's so much emphasis on synthetic chemicals and the county government supporting agrochemical companies in such weird ways. And yes, Emmanuel, I live in a place where avocados are sprayed all the time. In fact, I only eat my avocados from one other shamba in my own village because I know how unsafe food can be. But what I am saying is that there is hope. We can educate ourselves. We can read, we can just get involved in farmer networks. We can go to organic farmer markets. I know there's one open now in Kiambu. I'm not talking about the premium places that look unattainable like the current farmers market. I'm talking about a farmers market in Kiambu. I am so determined with a community of female farmers that are female organic farmers here in my village to set up a Makuyu farmers market on the highway. I'm praying that this super highway is finished and we can set up an organic farmers market where food costs the same as it would have cost in the market at Keno or the market at Kawangware, but it is safe food for everybody and they can access it and they can meet their farmer. I'm so grateful when you say, Christine, that your mom would go to visit her friends who had started farming and she'd come home with safe food. I am simply saying that those are small steps that people can take so that you don't despair. But I would also say, if you live in the city, you have a balcony, you have a small window, you have a small piece of grass, start growing your own skuma, start growing your own spinach, get a seedling of cherry tomato, I'll even give it to you so you always have tomatoes that are safe for you to eat. Just start small and the hope will increase even as you go along. There are solutions. It's not all doom and gloom. We are not all dying tomorrow. We can make choices today.
Start small and the hope will increase. That is such, I'm going to take that away. So we have just a few minutes left and I want to reserve the rest of our time for responding to questions that are coming in, and then I will ask the closing question and also allow for closing remarks. One anonymous question: how do we get farmers to transition into organic farming? Emmanuel, maybe you can respond to this. Farmers are a lot of times also business people, right? They're making decisions that are motivated by profit. And even there's someone in the chat here who is saying that even farmers separate their food. There's the one which is destined for the market, which they may put all the pesticides and everything to make it look nice and green and sewage and everything. And maybe there's the one which they know they are going to eat, which they treat differently. How, as a farmer and as someone who is in advocacy spaces like this, what kind of policies or regulations or initiatives or even informal and intangible incentives can be put in place for farmers who are looking at making money and making profit, and let that not have a clash with safety and with what is actually good for people?
Yeah, Christine, I think farmers are struggling with a lot of issues, not only to sustain their livelihoods, but also to ensure profitability of the ventures they are engaged in. Yeah. Setting up my farm myself, it's very expensive and all that. I mean, it's not something you just do out of it. But I think one thing I want to focus on is actually just the production, good food production or safe food production, before we even start to label it as organic or not. I think when we put the label is where we make it look like it's unachievable. But I think the first thing we need to talk about in this country is just, first of all, producing food that is safe, okay? Because there are farmers who are stuck, for example, in use of pesticide products and all that. For them, the transition will have to take much longer. They'll have to know about safer options. They'll have to know about pesticides that have lesser effects. They'll have to know about post-harvest index and how to observe that and how to make sure you minimize risks when you're using that. But really, that process has to start from there. By the time we're talking about organic food, I think all of us need to be at that level where we can be confident that the food that we have produced, first of all, is not harmful, because that is where we are as a country, that some of the food that is produced is harmful. And some of these farmers, mind you, are also eating the same food. Some of the farmers who are growing those vegetables with sewage water are eating the same vegetables. Yeah. So it's not entirely like, you know, they are doing it intentionally to sell bad food. Some of those farmers just don't know, because we have killed our extension services. We are not supporting our farmers anymore with the knowledge. Those ones who are overusing chemical pesticides, it's because the people who are visiting them and people who are selling pesticides to them. So that is what they know to be farming. They know farming to be spraying. And they think that by spraying, even without seeing the disease, they are better farmers. They think that by spraying and killing all the weeds along the row, and the farm looks clean. In fact, in my village, they say, ile shamba ya huyo jamaa ni safi sana. You know, like this guy has cleaned. You know, you look at, you bend and look at the maize rows. Their maize rows are clean. It's like they have been drawn, my friend. So that is the perception that we have given to farmers. But if farmers know that it's okay to have a few weeds grow with your maize, they will not kill your maize, you know, as long as the population of the weeds is manageable and all that. Because the weeds are also going to give you cover, they're also going to, so there's a lot of conversation to get to transition. It's not something that we click like this and it's going to happen. And it is not something that we are going to push to farmers as consumers and tell them, you know what, today start growing organic food. Those challenges that farmers are going through, the needs that those farmers have are our responsibilities as consumers. If we don't support farmers through advocacy, through engaging with the government, through engaging in policy quotas, that farmers are supported more, that farmers are given options when it comes to subsidies. They are not just given chemical fertilizers, whether they need it or not. They're given options to subsidize their production in a way that is sustainable. If we don't do that, there's no way these farmers are going to transition to organic. And we get to a level where you're saying, you know, people say, I don't care, I'll just produce how I can produce, how I've been taught to produce, and I don't care who is going to eat it. But that is not our culture. That is not our culture. We are people, you know, Christine, if I sell you something that is bad, I will not sleep at peace. We know that is who we are. If someone steals because they are hungry, they will not sleep in peace because they know the person they stole from is disturbed. Yeah, that is the people we are. Even the guys who are stealing phones in town are not at peace because they feel that responsibility. We are people who are connected. So it doesn't mean that farmers don't care. They care, but we need to really support them in the transition towards safer, towards more sustainable farming methods that are going to ensure that we have food today and food tomorrow and food that is good for us.
Emmanuel, thank you so much for reminding us what is normal and natural to us is not exploiting people, cutting corners and giving people things that are not good for them. Like, we should never normalize it and make it look like that's our way of doing things. Chef, I want to bring you in now. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A right now. Stephen is asking about the role of brokers in the food value chain. Brokers provide linkage between producers and consumers, but most of the time, brokers overexploit farmers. We're talking about the value chain, the process in which the food moves from, as people say, farm to fork, right? So I'd like you to just talk about that. How do you see consumers being more actively involved in that chain, so that it's not just, we are not just at the fork end, and also we may not be actively, all of us, I guess, on the farm end, even though after this discussion, I personally feel very inspired to go and get at least dania, at least mint, something. I know I can do something in my front yard or backyard. Let's talk about that value chain and that process. Chef, how do you respond to that question of farm to fork? Chef, you'll unmute so that.
Thank you. So yeah, if I can excuse myself, if you please may, we have people who are more qualified to talk about value chain here. So if it's all right, I can just respond, make two very quick responses to the general comments. Number one, I saw a question in the question and answer dealing with organic, which is my area of main interest and main expertise. You know, I can talk more about those things. One, I can talk about the listener wanted to know whether labeling has to do with more or to do with preserving the food once it's harvested. That is actually not correct. Organic food means starting with the seed, that the seed was certified organic, that certain prohibited chemicals that have been proven to be toxic and carcinogenic and damaging to the environment, to the soil, to the bacteria in the soil, to the bees, to the butterflies, and all that kind of stuff are not used. So that's a very important point that I will not want the listeners to miss. It will be woefully being irresponsible if we make the assumption that we can take people's intent, to be okay for them to do bad. That's almost like excusing people to do bad things. You made a very, very important point. You say, and I know that I'm aware of this, that farmers in Kenya will grow food for their own consumption and willingly knowingly sell food that they've sprayed with chemicals, against they sprayed food with those chemicals and did not even allow the food to wait for the recommended days and take it to the market. That's something we should know. If somebody steals a phone from me, well, although they feel bad, that's not a consolation for me. That's number two. Number three, we should not assume that food that we grow is not being sprayed with chemicals, because we can do a very simple analysis. How many pounds of chemical fertilizer does Kenya import from outside? Those pounds of fertilizers are going to be used to grow food in Kenya. How many bottles or how many liters, millions of liters of Roundup does Kenya import from the West? Those Roundup is going to be used to grow food. Therefore, labeling to me goes without saying. We should label the food because it's not practical for everybody to know their farmer. It's not practical. It's good, but it's not practical for everybody to know their farmer. So I support labeling 100%. That way I know without any shadow of doubt. I don't want to second guess. I don't want to know, because I say this as at least in the 1 second that I have. The Organic Food Act was passed in this country in 1990. And what that means is that if you sell me food that you tell me is organic, I can actually take you to court. Kenya has refused to pass organic food, in my view, has refused to pass Organic Food Act in the interest of major agricultural companies here in the US, because they want to sell more chemicals in Kenya. If we have more stiff laws, a lot of these fast food food that's being sold in Kenya, it will not be sold in Kenya. We all have been part of all these fundraisers of people asking for money because they got sick, because they have medical bills they can't pay. That didn't happen. I don't know how old most of the people on the farm is, but I'm 53. I turned 53 years today. Those things didn't happen in my days. So what does that tell me? Very simple analysis will tell me a lot of people are eating bad food in Kenya, a lot of people are going broke because they cannot pay for their medical bills, and they're having to resort to ask other people to give them money. So for that, I think we need to have a much better understanding of what organic food is and what some of the organic food and the consequences of eating food that's not organic, and having a country that has refused consistently to pass organic food laws. Look, people are telling me you can buy organic food. They're selling me organic food. Where did they get the seeds from? You cannot buy, there's not a single manufacturer of organic seeds in Kenya. And we don't seem to think that's serious. We don't seem to realize that that is serious enough that if we're going to talk about having organic foods, certified organic foods, we should first start with organic seeds. 90% of the seeds that you buy in the country are imported seeds. I fight tooth and nail to make organic seeds available in Kenya because I care about the food I eat. Even if I didn't care about anybody else, I spend quite a bit of my time in Kenya. And I can tell you, I will not buy food from anyone that I don't know just because I care myself. I don't even eat food in the airplane. I have not eaten food that's not organic since 1991. And I wish more people would say that, not for my own, not just because I'm a nice guy, because I know it's in my own national interest to have a country that is not spending too much money on treating people. If we spend such a big percentage of our money helping people pay their medical bills, that means we are not investing in the future, but we are sending most of our money in our graves. That's it. I pause.
Thank you for that, Chef. And you're already getting birthday messages in the chat. Emmanuel, I want to direct this to you. The question of the value chain. And if we just pick it up from what Chef has just said about even organic seeds, even from the seed level, right? If we're talking about the value chain starting at the seed, what can we do as consumers, since we are on this call, mostly as consumers, talking about food literacy, and a bit more as the few farmers and producers and processors who are here. But even if you're a farmer or a processor, at the end of the day, we all eat. So we are all consumers, right? Just talk to us about that value chain, and picking it up from what Chef has shared about even the seed level.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I think from where I sit, we ceased talking about value chains. We are now talking about food systems, because value chains are limiting in terms of how we look at and appreciate how our food and farming works. But I think on two things, yeah? and one, just to clarify, I didn't mean that people are not doing bad things and sleeping at peace. There are people who do that. But what I'm saying is, as a society, we need to appreciate what is remaining of us. You know, because when you go to war, you need to know what tools you have. Some of the tools that we have is still that we are still very connected as a people. In as much as that is changing very quickly, but we are still very connected as a people. I think we need to appreciate that I can go to my village today and attend any ceremony, and I can have food, and I will not doubt that food, because that is what we are as a society. So that is still something I still feel strongly that we need to appreciate. And our farmers have not abandoned us. Our farmers have not become blind to the effect of what they're doing. There are some crooks, but not all farmers. I think I can vouch for 80% of farmers who are doing things the right way. And if they are making mistakes, some of them are making mistakes because they don't know. If you engage them, you realize they just don't know. But anyway, to the point of seed, and I don't know how to link it now back to the value chain and all that. But I think for me, what we just need, first of all, to agree is that seed is seed. You know, this business of telling people that there are superior seeds to other seeds. Seeds are different, yes, just as people are different. There are taller people, there are shorter people, there are heavier people, there are lighter people, but people are people, yeah? So at the end of the day, there is no difference between a banana that has come from a tissue culture lab and a banana plant that has been removed from as a sucker from another place there. This is the tragedy that our farmers are suffering from, before even consumers see the effect. That we are coming to a level where we think that everything we have is not good enough, okay? We need to demystify that a farmer can grow their own managu and keep their seeds. And there are people who are doing that. It's not like it's zero. There are people who are doing that. I bought some seeds recently for, I think, 4 indigenous vegetables, well labeled, well packaged, 50 grams from rural outreach Africa in Vihiga. They collect from farmers and they put together, and then farmers who don't have those seeds can go and buy from them. And I'm intending to keep the seeds. So whether I label them as organic or not, for me, it's not the issue. The issue is, one, I have accessed the seed as a farmer, and they are good seeds, and they're going to give me a good crop, okay? So let's simplify it first, so that the labels make things look difficult. That's the point I'm driving. I want us to talk about, first of all, I want us to understand what good food is, what safe food is, before we talk about what organic food is, or what food that has been grown agroecologically is. You know, those we are complicating now. I am an expert in that, I studied that, but I'm not interested in having those terminologies first. Let's first of all talk about good food, safe food, nutritious food, okay? We agree there, then we can go to the next class. And I think we are not going to have the next class today. So today, I just wanted to focus on good food. It's possible to grow good food, the seeds are there. Some farmers are trying to keep seeds, but the legislation are not supporting that process of farmers keeping seed. Our policies are not recognizing that farmer varieties are also equally good. To a point that we even want, you know, we are forced to even register grass varieties, and grasses grow together better when there are different species mixed together. Research has shown that. People have done research, they have shown that you cannot grow Masai love grass alone, you have to mix it with other grasses. But you see the regulation says you have to sell this seed as an individual variety. So whose legislation is that? It's not working in our context, okay? The same way, all these other conversations, managu is better when you mix the different varieties. Who is growing 10 acres of managu, same variety of managu? It's absurd, it is wrong. I think at the end of the day, we just need to go back and appreciate the basics. Then we can graduate slowly as a community, as a society, and talk about that. But I think some of those things that we have put ourselves as targets, sometimes I feel like they might not be speaking to us. Our demands are very basic and our systems are not as spoiled or as corrupted as we might want to see. Most of the farmers in this country are actually practicing organic farming. Is only that they have not been labeled or satisfied. And I have said, I don't need to get anyone to satisfy my friend before I can buy food from them. So if I know avocados are coming from Muranga, it is up to me to make friends with the people from Muranga so that when avocados are in season, I will get them from there. I think that is something we can still do. We don't need to go the Europe way. We don't need.
Emmanuel, thank you so much for saying that. I want to just direct the last questions. I'm going to combine them to Wanja. What initiatives should be put in place to ensure that as consumers, we can access safe food from our local markets without necessarily visiting an organic shop? You had already begun speaking about this, but I'm seeing the question coming in. I think people need reassurance that it's possible and it's within their reach. Another question is how we commercialize village farming in Africa. And I think you had already begun to answer this by saying that the shift is going more towards small rather than big, right? So maybe we can talk about that, which connects to this question of how do we shift to a clean, slow food system? So we can, Wanja, you can begin with the reassurances of good, safe food without necessarily visiting an organic shop, and also the question of slow food.
Great, I can do that. I want people to go and visit Sylvia's Basket, which is a very good organic shop because it is run by a farmer. She has a farm and she puts her food there for people to to go and buy and eat. And it's to say that all sorts of entrepreneurial endeavors that have to do with increasing access to safe food should actually be encouraged, and not just encouraged by city council giving licenses when they should, not demanding bribes. Actually, inspectors come in when they should, and allowing people to trade. But also the one way in which we will encourage all sorts of enterprise around safe food is by consumers demanding safe food. And I think it is just that demand. If we demanded safe food, we would have markets that actually have organic food, that have safe food. And I get Emmanuel's point. So let me stop with the semantic. Safe, healthy food. We can demand that. If we demanded that, I can assure you, every organic farmer I know, all of them, one of the things they worry about is market. Is not supply. They grow food, it is market. If consumers demanded, and what I mean by demand is actually asking those questions. Let the trader lie to you that the ndomas have come from Muranga. Let them lie, but ask that question. The more of us who ask that question, the more we will encourage safe food to be produced. Just to touch on the person who talked about brokers, even brokers are part of the enterprise around safe food. I think, and we must encourage that, because farmers must take food to the market, and not every farmer has a pickup to take food to Nairobi. There are farmers who just stay in their shamba. There must be a middleman who comes and buys. But we as consumers, if we keep demanding that we want 200 shillings for a bag of potatoes, then we know that we are impoverishing the farmer and that we are only enriching the broker. So I think it is just about encouraging the enterprise around safe food. The more we encourage it, and the only way we can encourage it as consumers is by, again, I say, demand safe food. And again, I will reiterate, getting to know your farmer is not that difficult. It actually is not, because we do know somebody who has a farm somewhere. We just need to know how we can get that food onto our plates. If I talk about certification, I will say that this country of ours is moving a lot into registration, certification, and licensing of food production. And we need to worry about the legislation that is leading to more and more demand for certification and licensing and registration. Just the other day, we defeated a very bad portion of a bill that wanted us to even register our beehives. And the only thing that I wanted to do was make it impossible for small-scale farmers to grow food and leave our food production in this country to large-scale farmers. And unfortunately, we have a political leadership that is very interested in large-scale food production. So we are going to be left with having 4 or 5 families in this country that feed us, because they're the only ones who are certified organic. They're the only ones who are certified to do this. So for me, the communities of trust are more important than certification. The communities of getting to know who produces your food is more important than a label on an onion that says organic. I'd much rather know that farmer in Vihiga who grows maize. In fact, right now, there is maize seed that is coming for me from Vihiga itself. I am getting maize seed from a farmer on a bus. It's not very difficult to get safe food from all over the country. It's not that hard. We just need to demand it. The more we demand the things that work in the West, the more they will destroy our food production. We need to actually encourage small production of food, slow food, small places where food comes from, not mass markets. In fact, we have seen with the COVID epidemic, the first thing that has been hit in this country is shopping malls. We need to understand as a people, we are actually not purchasers of big things in big places. We are small scale purchasers. We are small scale producers. So you need to know who has the bees, where your honey comes from, who has the bananas, where your matoke is coming from. You can know. It's not that hard. If you know who your teacher is, and if you know who your doctor is, and if you know who your chief is, you can know who your farmer is. Let's just demand it of ourselves. We can do this.
Wanja, thank you so much for your reassurances. Thank you to our panelists today. We are out of time. We are coming to the end of our time together. I just want to say that we have put up the last poll of the day. We had an opening poll, and now we have a closing poll that has just gone live. So just take 2 minutes to answer the 3 questions. I think you'll even take less than 2 minutes. You might take 30 seconds. I think the discussion today has been so rich, and not just even from the panel, but even from the chat. The kind of things that have been discussed aside what we've been talking, have really been brilliant. So in the next couple of minutes, as I close, just go in if you haven't had a chance to see the comments that have been coming in. This has been a really enriching, really enriching conversation, provocative, and I just want to say thank you to our panel today. Thank you, Wanja. Thank you, Chef, and happy birthday. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you for all your insights that have really brought this issue into such clarity, and they've found a home in our lived experiences, the context that we are in. I just want to pass this over to Feli and Leila at Root to Food Initiative to close for us. As I've said, my name is Christine Mungai. I'm a writer and journalist. Edwin's question was being typed by Emmanuel, if I'm not wrong, before it disappeared. Edwin's question, yes, he says, please reach out. He has put,
you can get in touch. Huh?
Yep, he's put his email. But actually, I want to close with what Edwin has just said. Now that we're in another election season, I think it's important for us to think about developing our demands in that kind of concrete and formal way, demanding our right to food that we can present to coalitions, because food is a political issue. Edwin, thank you so much. And I really want us to end with that food is political, right? And it is time for us to think about it in that way. It's not just about consumption. It's about power. That's what Chef opened with. And power is really what politics is all about. I'll open it up now to our friends from Root to Food who put together our panel, and they'll tell us on the next forum that we have. Like I said, this is the first in 3 public forums. So Feli, asante.
Thank you so much, Christine, for holding up the energy, and thanks once again to Emmanuel, Wanja, and Chef Kabui, and also to all the participants for your active participation. The next webinar, the next part of the Food Literacy Forums will be on the 18th of November. We hope to see all of you there. And you can also follow the conversation online using #FoodLiteracyForumsKE. And yeah, for more information, also follow Root to Food online and also join the Root to Food Alliance. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to everyone who put up with my tech issues at the beginning. I know it's really uncomfortable when the moderator is having glitchy tech issues. So thank you for bearing until I got a solution, and for all the 50 people who had the patience to bear with that. So asanteni sana. I thank you for giving me a chance to get back online. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Atamba.
We are still on the poll.
All right. All right, Wanja, have a good one. I'll be in touch about this thing. Asante, asante. Oh man, it's just another day. It's another day, but I'm glad to be alive, man. Any day, every day is a happy day, born day for me. All right. Asante sana. Asante, asante. Asante Atamba, Tongea. Thank you very much. Very good discussion, man. Thank you.
This was amazing. So enriching. Thank you so much.
Asante, Christine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Asante. Keep writing. Keep writing. Thank
Happy
you.
birthday, Chef.
Asante, Felista. Umefanya kazi poa sana. Keep up the good work. All right. Sawa. Be in touch.
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm just waiting for the other participants to leave, or I'll just save them.
Okay.
I'll just save them. Yeah.
Okay.